Welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack. With me today is Erik Skopil, and we're going to be doing some NFL Combine stuff. This is the last 4 days we've been going over through the Combine. Oregon had 12 representatives. We had a podcast probably 2-3 weeks ago talking about what it would look like. And so we're going to dive right into that. But first, Erik, how are we doing today?
Can't complain. I was just telling you, I had a good weekend.
Yeah.
And you were out at the ballpark, by the way. What's it like watching 35 runs?
Um, not as exciting as some people may think. When it was 21-1, it was like, all right, well, we can get on with our day here. There's still another game in this doubleheader, but 14 more runs were scored, so not as fun as some people might think, but still a productive weekend, I guess, overall.
Yeah, we should note pretty good weekend for all I think, Oregon sports teams. Oregon women's basketball drops the game in Washington, but the Diamond sports teams are hot here. I think the softball team's 20-1. As a baseball team, have they lost?
Yeah, they're 10-2.
It's just it feels like things are going right now, and it's spring, and it's good to have this mixed in with obviously some look ahead at the NFL Combine here.
Yeah, and spring football should be getting started sometime this month. It's now March, so
10 days away, roughly 10 days away, Jared.
So yeah, which is a little alarming. Yes. It feels like we were at the Rose Bowl yesterday. But anyways, we were not in Indianapolis, but 12 Oregon Ducks were. And so we're going to run through all of those. I think we're going to just start by going in order of who were the participants throughout all of these events. And Thursday was the first day of the NFL Combine that had people out on the field and getting measured, running 40 times, all that good stuff. And those were the defensive linemen and linebackers. So Oregon saw Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Jordan Birch, and Jeffrey Bosa go through the first set of drills and running again, like I said earlier. I don't know who we want to start with here. Probably Derek Harmon, who's maybe Oregon's number one draft prospect. I thought that he did everything to solidify himself as a potential first-round pick. Weighed in at 313 pounds, I believe, 6'4.5", 34-inch arms, 34 3/8 arms to be specific, which for those of you who are unaware, those are very long arms and will help his draft stock even more. Only participated in two, I guess, like timed activities. There's a lot of them. Went through the 40-yard dash and then did all of the on-field drills. Ran a 4.95 40-yard dash, which may seem slow if you're, a lot of times people talk about the 40 as like guys who run it fast and stuff. But when you're 313 pounds, if you get under 5 seconds in a 40-yard dash, that's pretty darn good. And his 10-yard split, which is what scouts and coaches and everybody look for, in a 40-yard dash for defensive and offensive linemen, ran a 1.74 split. So that's pretty darn good for Harmon in a deep defensive line class. So I thought that he solidified himself and might have even made some money, just depending on how people watched him, how people like him. But certainly the measurements were there for people to say, yeah, no, this guy's exactly what we thought he was on tape. And then he just proved it here at the Combine, which is honestly what it's all about.
Yeah, I think he and we'll talk about Josh much later, I guess, because O-line were some of the last to go. But I think those two really solidified themselves as a tier clearly above the rest of Oregon's draft prospects in my mind. And we'll see what the fallout is in terms of mock drafts. And Jared, maybe you've already seen. I feel like those two are pretty clearly both first-round picks ultimately. Yeah. Harmon and Connerly. I feel like Connerly athletically did some stuff. We'll get to that later. That was impressive. But you're right on Harmon, and I think he was maybe one of the two or the three biggest winners out of this whole thing from an Oregon perspective, of just like, we saw the explosiveness, which, by the way, I was listening to a couple of those draft prospect podcasts, I should say, and just talking about Harmon and when he was at Michigan State, and some of this explosiveness wasn't really present at that point, but it really emerged at Oregon. And it was obviously really encouraging Jared, as you did, just kind of ran through some of those numbers, but it wasn't just the 40, it was the first 10 yards, right? It was just how explosive this guy is. And we saw that at Oregon all of last year. And I think if it wasn't such a deep defensive, especially interior defensive line class, I kind of wonder like how high of a pick could he have gotten to? But at the same point, like this is a guy who's going to be a first round pick, and you have to really appreciate his year at Oregon. I think, like, I don't know, like who's more interesting to you amongst the other defensive line guys, Jared? Like Jordan Birch being significantly smaller, but also extremely fast, or Jamari just like at 332 pounds running 5.16 was like, to me, one of the big, like that really popped for me.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think both of those guys are equally interested. I'm going to keep like talking about Jamari Caldwell and that he's like underrated, just because I really think he is. You know, he's like a top 250 draft prospect in a lot of these NFL draft big boards, and he was really disruptive at his time in Oregon and didn't have the stats to prove it. But you know, each play he and Harmon were demolishing people on the interior offensive linemen. And I thought that it's such a needed trait in the NFL. That's why a couple of years ago we saw Jordan Riley get drafted in the 7th round by the New York Giants, I believe it was. That was a guy who really wasn't a big factor, like on the defensive line, like compared to either obviously Harmon, but compared to Caldwell, like guys who played the same position, roughly the same size, but and you're in the NFL, you need those types of dudes. I mean, you look at the Eagles who won the Super Bowl. Everybody talks about their defensive line, and obviously it's full of Georgia guys. That's one of the reasons why people talk about it. But it's so deep. They've got so much talent, and you can really never have too many defensive linemen because that's a position where people get hurt a lot, and that's honestly the most important position on the field, other than quarterback, in my opinion, is just getting after the quarterback, the most important position on the field. So I think I think Caldwell probably did himself a lot of justice, but I think Birch and what he did will also raise his draft stock. Like Erik said, came in like smaller than we thought he would be.
Shorter, which was interesting.
I think he was 6'6", 295 on Oregon's roster.
Yes.
Measured in just over 6'4", dropped down to 279 pounds, which I think was to be expected. I think he's better as like a wide, like a 9 technique, where he's kind of outside standing up more than he is interior, like a defensive end, which Oregon had him a lot. And that he was really good at the college level as a defensive end for Oregon. But at the next level, I think he's going to just need to be more of a stand-up 9 tech guy. But again, he was great. 4.67 40-yard dash at 279 pounds. There's some freaks in that defensive line class.
Yes.
So he wasn't near the top, but again, his 10-yard split was 166. Again, 467, 269 pounds. Like he was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th in 40-yard dash time in his position group at the combine. So I think he's made himself some money. And I think that's probably a second round pick, late second, early third, like top 100 prospect guy. So I just keep going back to like if DJ Johnson was a top 100 pick, like Jordan Birch, Jordan Birch should be a top 100 pick.
Well, now they're physically like the same size, which is the weird part.
Yeah.
I think that was the thing that was weirdest for me with Jordan was like all the measurement, like all the athletic testing was awesome, like through the roof, but the size is just so different. So I feel like we're talking about like a slightly different prospect because he's like roughly 2 inches shorter, 15 pounds lighter. That's just surprising. The weight, maybe not as much, but just being not 6'6", which by the way, Jared, like being around this guy, he felt all of 6'6". Like I was just a little surprised by that. I guess I'm at the point where like, do you think all 3 of those guys go top 3 rounds? Like, are those all day 1 or day 2 picks?
It's tough. I think it's just Caldwell and what teams need and what they want and what they think of their defensive philosophy in. I think he should be a top 3 round pick. He'll probably be a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick, and that's totally fine. Again, he has the pro day. He has interviews to do. He has all these other things to potentially boost his draft stock as well. But I thought Yeah, I think Harmon and Birch, you guys are like, okay, they're going to be top three round picks. I think Caldwell has been um, the biggest upside for them, I guess, in terms of draft stock so far at the combine. And he was, I mean, even on like on-field drills, he was a lot of fun to watch just because he moves well, and we all kind of knew this too about Caldwell. Like we've seen him, he's a pass rusher out of the nose tackle position, which doesn't really happen. He's light on his feet. He was able to get in the backfield and make plays. Um, Again, like you said, ran a 5.16 40-yard dash at his size, which is impressive. 27-inch vertical, which may not sound like much, but when you think that Jabar Muhammad had a 29.5-inch vertical jump, like that's that's pretty impressive for
While
a guy.
carrying like 220 pounds less weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
Like
whatever.
other guys,
Not quite that much, but you know what I mean? Like 150 pounds or whatever.
yeah, and other guys who weigh as much as Caldwell does, like jumped around the same measurement. So it's not like he was an outlier in the good or the bad. He just has athleticism, and I don't think a lot of people recognize that. And I think they will shortly. I think he proved it at the combine. So I think Caldwell is probably the biggest riser of those three, just because he performed well, and then I just think people were down on him as a prospect. I think that people are just going to want to draft him at some point, and Harmon and Birch were pretty much solidified as top 3 round picks.
The last thing I'll say on Caldwell, and then we can move on to Jeff Bosa, is just that, like, I guess my sense of where his draft stock has changed a little bit. Just listening to some of the draft podcasts, I listened to the PFF draft guys talk about their defensive line rankings, and they had Caldwell as, I think, their 9th or 10th ranked interior defensive lineman. That includes, D tackles, nose tackles, just all variety. And one of the analysts said that they thought Jamari was, like, obviously not their number one interior guy, but like one of their favorite guys to watch, just because of the things you were talking about, which at 330 pounds, his agility, explosiveness, all of that really popped. And so like, I had him, and we'll do this at the end. Those who listened to the first NFL draft kind of preview thing, I kind of tiered, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 prospects. I had Jamari, I think, as a tier 3 prospect in terms of just those guys. And I was kind of mimicking it as like day 1, day 2, day 3. I think Caldwell is very much now in that second group because of kind of everything I've heard from some of this podcast and some of the mock stuff, but then also just the performance in Indianapolis was, I think, really pretty impressive for a person his size.
Absolutely. All right, yeah, let's jump into what Jeffrey Bosa did. Kind of an up and down combine for him. 40-yard dash, 4.63, slower than I think a lot of people expected. I'm not saying he was supposed to run like the 4.4s or something, but only 0.04 faster than Jordan Birch. Oh, I got a cough. Sorry about that. Just losing my voice. Only 0.04 seconds faster than Jordan Birch, even though Birch had like 40 pounds of weight on him. Not the greatest look, but also 159 10-yard split, which is pretty good. 38.5-inch vertical jump, which I think was 3rd or 4th of all linebackers. 3rd. 7.34 cone drill, which is really good. And then a 21 rep bench press, which is very good. For those who don't know, bench press at the combine is 225 pounds on the bench for 21 reps. That was tied for 4th for all linebackers. Him and a guy out of Auburn and one out of UNLV. So again, like up and down, like speed might not have been there, which could hurt his pass coverage skills or put some worry about that, but also showed that he's quick around the line of scrimmage with the shuttle drill, which he did pretty darn well in. And then shows he has the strength, which I think was maybe a bit of a concern. Obviously, a guy who moved from safety to linebacker, we've all heard the story, had to add a lot of weight, added 6 pounds from the pro day, or excuse me, the Senior Bowl to the combine in like 3 weeks time. I think he probably stayed the same in terms of his draft stock, probably a 4th or 5th round pick kind of guy. Which is fine. Oregon's had a lot of success with 4th round picks if we look at last year and what those guys did. But I think a guy who, if he ran better, probably would have been one of the biggest risers from the combine. But That's okay. Like, we all knew that Jeff wasn't the world's greatest athlete at the linebacker position, and then there's some freaks out there at the combine this year, as there always are. But a guy who I think solidified his draft stock and kind of is what we thought he was, like a good overall athlete at the linebacker position, solid tackler in space, willing to go get a guy behind the line of scrimmage, but might kind of struggle in pass coverage, as we've seen in his Oregon career. So overall, I thought it was a good combine for him, and he's always going to interview well. He's a very well spoken individual. Always takes the time to give you well thought out answers, and is a real film junkie and understands football at like a different level than a lot of people.
Yeah, for all those reasons, by the way, Jeff will always be kind of a favorite of mine. We had so many, and he was kind of became the team spokesman. This just happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Williams brothers before him were kind of the guys that Bennett and Evan. Jeff just kind of naturally became that as one of the team leaders, and so this is a guy you just kind of naturally root for because you talk to him more than the other guys.
Right.
He was, and as you said, Jared, like very well spoken. Seems like a really genuinely good guy, and I think to your point, performed pretty well overall. 21 bench reps at 232 pounds. He's basically benching his own body weight over 20 times, which is like pretty damn impressive if you ask me. You're right, the straight line speed stuff. And to your point also, like, I don't know if I'm really surprised he ran 4.63. Like, it would have been, he probably would have made himself some money if he would have run like 4.53. But I agree with your kind of assessment of, like, this is somebody who's getting drafted. I think if the athletic testing stats had been, a step above this, maybe he can be somebody who sneaks into that day 2 range. But I think you're right that now it does feel more like this is a early day 3, 4th, 5th round pick. Maybe if there's a team who has a real need at linebacker, he slips into the back of the 3rd or something. But the ceiling for Jeff, I think, because of especially the speed numbers, not being quite what you hoped for. Maybe I wouldn't say expected, because I think, like you, Jared, I was not expecting him to run super, super fast. But I think the baseline is clearly there for this guy to get drafted and to make a team, and to probably have depending upon how he performs, a solid NFL career. So good day, not outstanding day, I would say, for him in Indy.
Yeah, like Chris Paul Jr. at Ole Miss ran a 4.63 40. Like, that's a guy who's like not going to be drafted. Like, he's one of the better linebacker prospects in the class, and this is what happens. And I think Jeff plays a little bit faster on the field, kind of like Tez Johnson. We'll get to him later, but he plays faster on the field, and there's a lot to take away from straight line speed. Like, it certainly helps to see how fast a guy can run, but he's got all the intangibles. Like, I don't think this hurts his draft stock at all, like we just talked about. I think he'll be doing just fine. That covers Thursday. Let's jump over to Friday, where we had cornerbacks and tight ends, and we should start with Oregon's biggest riser in Terrence Ferguson. At least I think so.
Biggest winner of the weekend, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Ferguson just dominated like his position group in the combine. First in tight end 40-yard dash times at 4.63. Tied for first in 10-yard split at 1.55. Was first in vertical jump at 39 inches. Was third in broad jump at 10 feet 2 inches. Don't think he participated in the 3-cone drill or the 20-yard shuttle or bench press, but he was tops of the class in a tight end group that there are 2 clear tight ends who are higher than him, in Colston Loveland out of Michigan and Tyler Warren out of Penn State. But Ferguson did all he could do to make himself like the number 3 tight end. It's going to be between him and Harold Fannin, the Bowling Green tight end, and maybe some other guys, but he was awesome. I mean, I didn't expect him to run a 4.63, which is the same time as Bosa, who weighed 15 pounds lighter. He's a good route runner, as we've also seen in Oregon. He's got solid hands. I wouldn't say the greatest, but when you need a catch, he's there. And he is an athletic specimen for a guy who's 6'5" and weighed in at 247 pounds. And in the NFL, I don't think teams are going to be, it depends on offense, but I don't think teams are going to be lining him up in line as much as Oregon did in 12 personnel packages, where they need him to block. They need him to run and pass block. That's Ferguson's worst trait, I think, is his run and pass block. Not that it's bad, but again, when you look at what he did at the combine, where he's fast, he's quick, he's agile, he can jump high at 6'5". Like, it's okay to have a bad trait, and I think pass blocking, run blocking is his bad trait. I think teams are going to line him up in the slot, or teams are going to have two tight ends on the field, but he's not going to be required to block. So I think he's the biggest riser of the weekend. I think without a doubt. I don't think there's anybody that really comes close, frankly.
I agree. Yeah, and just to one point of context, you noted Loveland and Warren being clearly the top two guys. They didn't participate in any of this stuff. So no. He is the alpha sans those two guys. And I think he probably would have run comparable times to those guys. I'm actually curious. I want to know what Loveland was going to run, frankly. That was a guy I was curious about with just having watched him at Michigan, what he would have run. But you're right. Like, I think Ferg is a big riser here. Athletically, you could now argue like he's one of the alphas in this class. And where does that put him? Where does that slot him in? I think it is notable. You mentioned 247. That's about 10 pounds lighter than he played at 255 at Oregon. So cut some weight. I'm going to guess they'll probably put that back on, but that's pretty normal for these guys, right? Trying to get slimmer to run faster to, put up those type of times. I mean, running 4.63, not on my radar for Ferg. Super impressed. I mean, we'll get to Tez in a moment. I'm not trying to drag him, or have him catch a stray here. But I mean, the fact that Ferg was within 1/10 of what Tez Johnson ran just tells you the type of explosiveness and what he was able to do out there. So I thought that part obviously helps him. And I'll be really just kind of curious, Jared, of like what the discourse now becomes about where he goes. Like, what's the ceiling here? Like, if he's the third tight end off the board, and I don't know if that'll become consensus or not, but if that's the case, and that's actually how this goes, like, could he slip into like the second round just with how valuable that position has become, right? And like
100%.
The athletic testing and the catch, all the stuff we just talked about, like he, I think, has to be somebody who could, now be maybe could he be the third Oregon player off the board now?
Yeah, I think so. Usually in the second round, there's a run on tight ends, and like we said, Loveland and Warren are going to be probably first round draft picks. Then it's going to come down to what teams like at the tight end position, because you have Mason Taylor out of LSU and then Christian Arroyo out of Miami, two guys who are kind of similar to Terrence Ferguson. I think Taylor's more of a better blocker, but there's going to be teams there in the second round who probably towards the later half of the second round, like teams that were already in the playoffs or something like that, where they feel good about what their overall team looks like and have kind of this luxury pick to spend. And there are some teams that don't have good tight ends or have aging tight ends. Like, again, I'll use the Eagles for an example. Like, they have Dallas Goedert. Like, that's a guy who's getting up into his mid to late 30s. Like, they're going to need somebody to replace him. And there are plenty of teams like that. Even the Chiefs, they have Noah Gray, but they have Travis Kelce who's getting older, somebody who needs to, get in there and do something different. And so that could be where teams kind of stack up on tight ends. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Ferg becomes a second round pick. I think that he just has everything that you want in a tight end. And he proved it on Friday at the combine that he can run fast. He's a good route runner. He caught all the things he needed to do. And then he showed that he's athletic on tape and then in actual testing. So I think his draft stock is through the roof right now. We'll see where he comes out on some of these like mock drafts or big boards or whatever. But like we said at the start, like biggest riser for sure, and could certainly be a second round talent. I think it wouldn't be surprising if he still stayed in the third round. It all depends on what team needs are and stuff like that, because that's how the draft works. They don't draft how maybe an NBA team would draft, where you just take the best guy available sometimes. But we'll see. Like, again, I think there could be somebody in the back half of the second round. Like, I don't know. There's been a lot of Broncos talk. Obviously, the Bo Nix connection. Terrence Ferguson is a Colorado kid. Will it happen? Who knows? But I got to look up where Denver's pick. But I know that they have a second round pick.
It's probably right there in the middle, based upon their season finish,
right?
I guess. So
yeah, they have they were a playoff team last year, so I don't know. We'll find out. I can't find it right now, so we're gonna go jump over to Jabar Muhammad, who
yeah,
did not really do anything. Sorry, 51st overall pick. It looks like for the Denver Broncos there in the second round of the NFL draft.
that seems like a range you could fall into possibly.
Certainly, right there in the middle, like you said, Eric, between the first and the second round. Jabar Muhammad, not the best day at the office for the young man.
No.
On Friday this week at the NFL Combine. A lot of question marks around Jabar going into the Combine, just because he was a shorter cornerback. Obviously, had the production at the college level that got him the invite to the NFL Combine, but height 5'9", weighed in 182 pounds, 28 and 5/8 arms, 9-inch hands. Did not participate in the 40-yard dash. I think James Crepea talked to him from the Oregonian and said that he is waiting to run at the pro day. He wants all 8 weeks to get ready for pro day and run there, which could save his draft stock because he had a 29.5-inch vertical jump, which is not great. Originally, there was, I think James as well said that there was a clerical error and it was actually 35.5 inches. And you're like, oh, that's pretty good. That's like right in the middle of the pack in cornerbacks. Nope, no error. Actually 29.5 inches. Just over a 7-second 3-cone drill, 4.19 20-yard shuttle, and 13 bench press reps, which pretty good for a cornerback, if I do say so myself. But not a good combine for the young man.
No, and 29.5-inch vertical, worst among all corners. Not a lot of other corners, seemingly based upon the database I'm looking at it here over on NFL.com, did the 3-cone or the shuttle, but his times weren't exactly stellar based upon the limited competition there either. It's disappointing. 5'9", 182 pounds, not going to blow you away with the size. We knew that. I don't think either of us really thought he was going to run. Well, he didn't run the 40, but I don't think any of us think he's like super explosive, but the lack of vertical, like that really surprised me a little bit because, and I think could be a big detractor in terms of draft stock. If you're undersized and you also can't get up and elevate, there's just certain guys you're not going to be able to defend at the high point, right? Like put him against anybody over 6'3" with the reasonable vertical jump. And if the quarterback puts the ball in a certain range, he's just not getting to the football. So I think that part is probably concerning. I don't know what he'll run in the 40 next, I guess this month.
Yeah, at some point.
Crazy to think about it. Sometime later this month, he'll be running in Eugene. But he's going to have to put up a great time, I think, to kind of make up for some of these concerns. Like if you run sub 4.5, I think you're going to go, doesn't have straight line speed, can't really jump. Some of the, again, and that's the other part in this that I get frustrated with is we're looking at this testing stuff and ignoring what he was on the field, which at times was a lockdown corner because he's really good technically. He does have some of that short area stuff, but I would be concerned about his draft stock. I think he hurt himself along with somebody we're about to talk about in a second here, probably just about as much as anybody, even though he didn't do everything. Just the fact that you kind of question now some of the explosiveness because he can't, again, like you said earlier, Jamari Caldwell, and he had comparable vertical jumps. It doesn't really compute for me.
Yeah, and that's the biggest takeaway is like when you're an undersized corner and you can't jump, it's like, okay, what are you then? And maybe he moves to nickel for a defense and
could be a good fit there.
That, and maybe that works out. But I think this was always the thing with Jabar. It was like we all knew that he was a really good college cornerback. He just didn't have the measurables that you want in the NFL. And he doesn't have the measurables that Oregon fans finally realized when they played Ohio State for the second time. It's like, yeah, you have 2 5'9" cornerbacks out there on the field at all times. And obviously they were very good cornerbacks all season long, but you go up against, Jeremiah Smith and guys like that, and Carnell Tate, dudes who are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", on the outside, and it's like this could be a real disadvantage if teams could play this properly. And in the NFL, they play those things properly. They have better quarterback play, they have better wide receiver play, but it works in college. It can work in the NFL. I'm not saying Jabar's done or anything like that, but wasn't a good combine for him. it certainly it certainly revealed that those question marks are legitimate concerns going into the draft. And I don't know if this means that he's undrafted or anything like that. I doubt it. But I think he probably stays at the same. There was a chance he could move up, but I think he probably stays at the same, where it's like a 6th, 7th round pick. And that's what I kind of expected going into.
I think, Jared, for him to move above that, he's going to have to run really well in Eugene and maybe test way better in the vertical in Eugene. Like if he, let's say he comes out and jumps 35, jumps what they, 35 and a half, which was, the reported number at one point, maybe that changes some of the conversation, but you're right. If he doesn't, if the 40 is not super impressive and the vertical doesn't change much, you kind of go, there's just too many almost limitations. I hate to say it feels like, to me, at least as an observer of all of this, not taking away with what we watched on the field this year, which is again the frustrating part, but at a certain point, you do have to have kind of this requisite level of athleticism and size to be able to compete at that level, or else it's just not going to translate. I think those are the concerns for Jabar.
Right. All right, let's take a break before we get into the Saturday, Sunday portions of the NFL Combine. All right, we are back going through the NFL Combine stuff. We've gone through the defensive linemen, linebackers, cornerbacks, and tight ends so far. So that was 6 or 7 Oregon players who took part in the first 2 days of the Combine. And now we're going into the back half, more of the offensive players. Let's see, it was Saturday, saw Jordan James, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, and Dylan Gabriel take the field for the measurements, for the drills, for all that good stuff that we know and love at the NFL Combine. Should we start with Tez?
I think we should. I think that's the place to go.
I think we should as well. As I'm sure many of you who are listening saw this or read about it somewhere, Tez Johnson's combine was interesting, to say the least. Measured in at 5'10" at 154 pounds. He is the lightest player in the NFL Combine since, I think, 2003. 29 and 3/8 arm, 9-inch hands, which matter but kind of don't. And with wide receivers, you either catch the ball or you don't. 40-yard dash, 4.51. Nobody who is under 170 pounds in the NFL Draft Combine has ran slower than 4.5. Tez Johnson, slowest wide receiver in the NFL Combine who weighs under 170 pounds in the history of it. So, not great, especially considering that he talked a lot that he was going to run quite fast and didn't. So I think let's start there. How surprising was this to you?
I think in the moment, really surprising, in part because of how he had talked and because these guys have obviously, for him to say he's going to, I don't think he threw a time out, but he said he'd be over in the blink of an eye.
If you blink, you might miss it, which is
right. That suggests he's timed himself like in the 4.3s, 4.4s. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you're saying that. Like, if he'd been running 4.51, leading up to this, I don't think he'd be hyping it up. And so that was part of the reason I was kind of like, he says one thing and then he goes out and he puts it at the time, which really hurts his draft stock. I think that part was disappointing and a little surprising. I think just thinking about who he is as a player, though, it kind of makes some sense that he's not like the fastest straight line guy. Because I was looking here. I mean, he did have the fastest 3-cone drill, 6.65 by a decent amount for all the receivers. And his first 10-yard split in the 40 it's like kind of right in the middle here. It's pretty comparable to what everybody else ran it. I think he was at 1.53. But just not somebody who has that ability to really separate vertically, if that's the case, over the rest of that, time getting down the field, which again doesn't always align, because I just think of the Denzel Burke route where he just ran flat on right by him. And, maybe that was his ability to wiggle and to create space and everything. And he maximized every step to create that separation, but he's still separated on a guy in Denzel Burke who people think will be drafted this year, right? Like a guy, and maybe not.
Guy who ran a 4.48.
Yeah. A guy who's faster than him, purportedly. So that part, I think, I don't know. It does surprise me, and it really hurts his draft stock, because now you're talking about Jared. There's really no history of any player with his size and speed limitations at this particular position being really even a draft prospect, probably. I mean, 5'10", 155 pounds running 4.5 is like, honestly, if you were to give those numbers, you'd be like, that's a high school kid who's going to go play at a lower level school, which ultimately was what he was. And I do think his ability to be so productive here speaks to what he did in that, in that 3-cone drill, putting up the fastest time, his route running ability. I know if you went and watched some of the drills he did, I think he was still really impressive there. Obviously had a great senior bowl week of practice and everything. So like, I still think there's some momentum here, Jared, but like, I also go, there's probably some teams who are just like, he's not on our board anymore because he's so small, he's so slight of build, and he's not quite got the speed we need. How are we using him? So this was probably one of the more perplexing days anybody's had in a while from an Oregon perspective, I would say.
Yeah, and it got even more perplexing as the day went on, because during on-field drills, Tez Johnson was the fastest wide receiver in running go routes.
Yes, there you go. Forget that too.
Yeah, he hit a top speed of 22.17 miles per hour, according to Next Gen Stats, which was the fastest wide receiver at the combine. And he only reached 22.58 during his 40, which was 25th of 38.9 wide receivers. So this gets way more complex as the day went on. We all know what Tez Johnson's game is. He's a slot guy who gets open in the middle of the field or the outside boundary and makes guys miss and goes about his business and can get you 7 to 12 receptions like this. And just as soon as you need him, he's right there. And, Oregon really missed him when he was out this year. I think my perception of him kind of stayed the same, maybe a little souring because 4.51 is just kind of slow.
It just optically is bad. It's just bad optically.
Yeah, it's just
right?
Not great. It's like when you're 154 pounds and you're running 4.51, like that almost seems impossible to do, as he's been a really high level college athlete for the last couple of seasons. But he's gonna have to be kind of like Muhammad. He's gonna be a guy who people have to rely heavily on their tape and really just know that he's going to be better in game than he is just in testing, which I think will be the case. I think that he's still going to be like a top 3-round draft pick. It's going to cause a lot of controversy for whoever takes him, and that's going to be okay. But I still think he's going to be a productive guy. Like you said, led the wide receiver group in the 3-cone shuttle. And that's kind of what he does. He's quick.
Right.
He's explosive in short yardage situations, and that's all you really need him to do. Oregon didn't send him on a lot of go balls. Like they had to, because Evan Stewart was hurt at points or hurt during the Rose Bowl. So you saw Tez Johnson get some action there. They did it on occasion, but he was never a go ball getter. Like Troy Franklin was the go ball getter. Evan Stewart was the go ball getter. Like this is a guy who would catch a slant, turn the corner, and beat everybody. And so I think his in-game speed is a lot faster than 4.51, but it doesn't look great. I would say, to me, his draft stock stayed about the same. It might have gone down in other circles. It might have gone up in other circles just because of his on-field participation. But it was certainly, I don't know, we were in the press box at PK Park watching it, and I was with Isaac Streeter, who works for the Portland Tribune, and we watched his first attempt, and it was, 4.55? Like, it was even worse. And we looked at each other and we were like, what? Excuse me? Because we were talking. It's like he's got to run sub 4.4 basically to be a real prospect, because he's 154 pounds. Like there's nobody who comes close to weighing that much in the NFL. Like that's just, there are a few people like who are 22 years old who weigh close to that much. Like 154 pounds is incredibly light. So he'll be okay. I think he'll still be drafted and all that good jazz, but it was kind of alarming when he ran that first one and then didn't really, because you don't improve by like 0.3 of a second.
Yeah, no one runs 4.55 and then no one runs 4.55 and then 4.25. It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. So it'll be fine. He tested incredibly well in every other number, but it's gonna leave some teams, like you said, Eric, with like I don't know about this.
He and Jabar, for me, along with some of the guys who didn't even go to the combine, are the guys who have the most to gain in Eugene at the pro day. Just because if he can prove, and I know I'm confounded a little bit as we talk that out, and just by what he actually ran. But if he can run, like you said, like I don't know. Can you improve? Can you take a tenth off that? Can you run low 4.4s? Can you run high 4.3s, which is, I think, what people sort of thought he'd run? And if he can do that at the pro day, that probably changes the conversation. But if he runs 4.5 again, that again is just going to solidify some of those limitations for teams. Last thing on Tez that was interesting was, I don't know if you saw this, he and Tank Dell are apparently kind of close, or good buds. That's been, I think, a lot of people's NFL comp for a while. And that gave me hope in the world that those little skinny slot receivers are noticing each other and becoming buddies, because they I guess are feeling solidarity for kind of the body types trying to make it at this level. I thought that was kind of cool.
Tank Dell, I looked this up. I just had it on my computer, but he ran a 4.49 at the NFL Combine back in the day.
Okay.
He weighed 10 pounds heavier, 165, but 4.49 and a 1.49 10-yard split. So again, a guy who was, Tank Dell, very, very productive in his short tenure in the NFL so far. Also a guy who's broken his leg and torn his ACL. So Tez obviously didn't really have a lot of injury concerns at Oregon, broke his collarbone, but I attribute that to just kind of like, he broke his collarbone. Like, that's not because he weighs 154 pounds. Like, Justin Herbert broke his collarbone in, was that 2018? And that guy's, built like a Greek god. So those types of things happen. He probably dipped a little in draft stock, but to me, he kind of stayed the same. Anything else on Tez in that episode?
No, I think we're good. We can move to Trayshawn and Dylan if we want, or Jordan, I guess.
Yeah, let's go Trayshawn real quick, because while I love Trayshawn and I think that he should get drafted, I'm not sure if he will. 40-yard dash, 4.57, measured in at 6'2", 205 pounds, 10-yard split, 1.54, 30, vertical jump 32 inches, broad jump 10'3", about kind of what you expect. Trayshawn will not be drafted because of his athleticism. He's going to be drafted because of how he plays football. And he's a big-bodied wide receiver who is not afraid to go out and block somebody on the perimeter. And he's physical. He's aggressive. He has some on and off field concerns that I'm sure teams will shy away from, but I want him on my football team. I'll tell you that much. If the Patriots had him, I'd say thank you very much. Just from watching him, that's a guy I want on the field who's not afraid to do the dirty work. And I think some teams are going to appreciate that. And I think some teams are just going to be like, all right, whatever, we can go, take a lottery pick here in the 6th or 7th round and we'll see you later. But I think he could be a guy who's drafted just late, but it's going to have to go to the right team.
Yeah, he what he definitely didn't do was separate himself from kind of the middle of the pack or the average in terms of 6'2", 205, 4.57 those are very kind of, I'd say, run-of-the-mill numbers, right? Those aren't just going to pop off or leap off a screen. 32-inch vertical, it's a good number, not a great number. In terms of the straight line speed, there have been times where he showed some juice in the open field. I think back to the Washington back in 2023 in the conference championship game to kind of like extend Oregon's window to be competitive there, to maybe win. That play he made on kind of that slant route and just took it to the house. And a couple times even this year, similar things. So I was wondering what he'd run. 4.57, not a great number for a receiver, especially one kind of in his, I guess I'd say, in terms of the skill set you're hoping to get out of that position, because ultimately this is probably going to be like a Z receiver. At least that's what he did primarily at Oregon. So I guess there's some concerns with that. But to your point, Jared, like I think, and this is the overarching thing that I've come back to a couple of times, like when people put up numbers like this, sometimes you go, well, gosh, there's a requisite you have to reach. Trayshawn does a lot of these intangible things. And it's kind of the same thing with Jabar, I guess, right? That conversation we just had of like, there's some of these things he does on the field that aren't going to show up in the testing that need to be reminded of. But Trayshawn's another guy who certainly the testing numbers aren't going to win him any favors in terms of where he goes. And that ultimately to me makes me question of like, where does he get drafted? I think he will be picked. I'm now wondering if he has a chance to go much higher than like the 6th or 7th round, just with what he put up there in Indy.
Probably not. He's been productive in his Oregon career.
Yes.
Like when Tez or in the Rose Bowl, when Evan didn't play, like he was a real number 2 receiver. And when he has room, he's got he has like top line speed. Like you said, the Washington game, we saw him dominate vertically against Michigan, against a really good secondary.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
when he has
Running away from people. Running
yeah,
away from people
exactly.
too at times.
Not being caught. Yeah. So I like him. I really like him as a wide receiver at the NFL level. He just does all the dirty work that that teams are gonna like. You know, a team like I'll keep bringing them up, but the team like the Eagles, man, when they run so much on the perimeter and they run these wide receiver screens, like the San Francisco 49ers, I think is a perfect match for him somewhere in like the later 6th or 7th round. Like teams who need hard-nosed receivers on the outside, I think are going to look at Trayshawn and see his body type and see how Oregon runs like an NFL offense nowadays and has strength training like an NFL team, has all these coaching staffs like an NFL team. Like they're gonna look at those guys and maybe he'll get picked up by one of those late rounders like the Chiefs, something like that, a physical hard-nosed team. Um, but we'll find out eventually. I think he was a 6th, 7th runner going into the day, and I think he's the same exact spot where he is today. Jordan James, running back, Oregon, did about exactly what I thought. Height, 5'9.5", 205 pounds, a little lighter than I anticipated, but that's okay. 29 3/4 arm, 9.5 hand, 4.55 40-yard dash, 1.62 10-yard split, 9.9 broad jump. These numbers are fine. This is kind of like what Bucky Irving did, and
it's actually quite similar to Bucky.
Yeah, it's we've seen Jordan James play. This was the whole thing about like Bucky Irving last year, and we saw Bucky Irving play. And when he was a 4th round pick, you're like, well, he's going to have to battle for time here, but if he gets in, he knows what he's doing. He's a great runner. He sees the field really well, and I think Jordan James is the same way. And we'll find out how he does in the NFL eventually, but I think teams, running backs, especially this year, where there's like a clear number one in Genty, and then just like a bunch of dudes in that 2nd to 3rd round range. I think James falls like right in line with those guys. I don't think I thought he ran fine. I think he's just one of the run of the mill, probably 2nd or 3rd round players. And, that sounds pretty good to me if you ask me, but we'll see eventually. But he didn't do anything I didn't expect him to do.
Just to kind of further that comparison to Bucky, it's pretty startling. The only real spot where there's much difference is Bucky's about 13 pounds lighter, but Bucky 5'9", 192, 29.5-inch arms, 9.5-inch hands, 4.55 40, 9.7 broad jump. Jordan James 5'9.5", 205 pounds, 29 3/4-inch arms, 9.5-inch hands. Again, these numbers are very, very similar. 4.55 40, 9.9 broad jump. Just running through that, these are very comparable players in terms of the size and speed and arm length, hand length, all that. I think on the field, I still probably like Bucky better just in terms of what he does in a phone booth.
Yep.
But Jordan, I'm curious to see where Jordan goes. This is a really strong running back class. I wouldn't be surprised if he and Bucky end up kind of comparable places in terms of draft placement, just because of the reality is I think last year's draft class wasn't a very strong class. This year's draft class has like 5, 6 really, really top tier guys. And I don't think Jordan is one of those guys. So I'll be curious to see kind of where he lands and what the ultimate assessment is for him. But I think he and Bucky are going to ultimately have kind of similar draft ranges. I would say Jordan feels like late 3rd to the kind of mid 4th where Bucky went right now. If I'm over here trying to project kind of where it seems like this is going.
Yeah, and there's, like you said, there's a lot of good running backs in this class, and some guys really helped themselves. Like I think Travion Henderson was one of those guys, as was Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. Like both ran really well. Judkins was a 4.48 40-yard dash guy, weighing in I think at 221 pounds. Like that's impressive. Like people are going to really like that. The other thing that James I think has going for him is this recent NFL trend on, hey, look, we should get better running backs. I'm all against it. Like running backs or whatever, you can go find them. But because of, I'm against it. Look, there's 17 guys here in this draft that I would say, sure, I'll take him. Donovan Edwards, just there. But like because of how well Saquon Barkley did with the Eagles and how well Josh Jacobs did with the Minnesota Vikings, like there was this run on free agent running backs that teams are like, oh, maybe we should look into the running back market more instead of just doing the Chiefs where they have like, washed up Kareem Hunt come back in because he's, he knows the offense, and they did just fine this year with that. So I think that could actually help James, where teams look for kind of talented young running backs here in the second and third round, which would be great for him. This guy is fine. I'd take a guy in the fourth or fifth round. Worked out pretty well for Bucky Irving. There's another fourth round running back whose name I can't remember from last year who was just fine in his NFL career. So I don't know. I think it's good for James. He's right in the middle of this group. He's got a long, storied history at Oregon with how well he's ran, even from his freshman year. Ran for almost 1,300 yards this last year. Like, I don't think people realize that he kind of shattered what Bucky did his 2 seasons. On more carries and maybe a little less inefficient, but he's a good runner, sees the field well, physical, all that good jazz. So I think he'll be just fine. But like you said, Eric, probably that third, fourth round pick, and that's okay. There's no problems.
I do have to correct you because Josh Jacobs played for the Packers, not the Vikings.
Oh, it's the Packers. Who went to the Vikings?
Aaron Jones from the Packers.
Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
He was
as a kind of a Viking fan still, I had to just nip that one.
That's totally fine. Yeah. I knew I messed that up. But anyways, Josh Jacobs, another guy who did well with the Packers.
Yes.
And Jones was fine with the Vikings. That's okay. There's a recent, run on running backs here in the NFL, which I think is dumb. But anyways, Dylan Gabriel, quarterback, Oregon, magically grew.
How about that?
From the Senior Bowl to the Combine. Don't know what that's about, but grew like an inch or like a half an inch, and is now like rounded up to 5'11", 205 pounds, 29 5/8 arm, 9 1/4 hand. Did not participate in any of the time drills or anything like that. Just threw on the field. I didn't watch any of it because I was at baseball. What about you, Eric?
I actually caught most of it. I thought he looked good.
Awesome. Okay.
Again, we have very few data points for Dylan, other than like there was a couple of stories about him being asked about his height, and he was like, I still won football games being this size. Like, did you guys see my resume? Like, I did all that stuff at the same size. I'll still be the same size going to the next level. Had a couple nice deep throws, which again, like we saw that at Oregon at times. Like I still think like the maybe best collection of long passes I've seen from an Oregon quarterback came against Ohio State, like in one game, like 3 absolute dimes, 2 of which went for touchdowns, 1 of which very well could have. So he showed a little bit of that off. I'd be curious to see like what I don't know if it's going to matter at all for his draft stock, but like, what does he do in some of this testing stuff? I am curious on that. I mean, his size is, I don't know. There are more quarterbacks who played at his size in the NFL than receivers who played at Tez Johnson's size, right? Like, I mean, that's just a fact. And so, do I think Dylan's going to have an incredible NFL career? Like, will it be on a Bo Justin, trajectory? Absolutely not. But do I think this is somebody who like ultimately might end up being a starter at some point in his career, or at least filling in as a starter? I think that's very much like in the realm of possibilities. Like it's been funny seeing Oregon fans talk about Dylan, like kind of what they think he is at the NFL. It's almost like they think he won't be anything. And I think that's probably not accurate, while also acknowledging there's tons of limitations that we're all pretty aware of from watching him here. Obviously very few of those were on display in Indianapolis because there's, you're not playing football out there. But I think he is still somebody who's right in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round range. And it kind of just depends on when a team wants to take a quarterback, because I think he's going to be one of the first, 5 or 6 quarterbacks taken. And that usually gets you somewhere in that kind of range. Yeah,
I'm with you. I mean, he's not going to be a first rounder or anything like that. Probably not even a second rounder. There's guys who you, as an NFL front office, are probably more willing to take a chance on. Someone like Jalen Milroe, like just a freak of an athlete and has like kind of prototypical quarterback size, but needs to work on mechanical adjustments more and is younger. Granted, the NFL has also had a run on older quarterbacks with Michael Penix and Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. They're going to do it again with Cam Ward this year, which is, makes sense. There's more experience. They know who they are. They know what they aren't. Dylan Gabriel certainly knows who he is and who he is not. Oregon also knew that last year. They really didn't try to test him too much. That's why the deep shots weren't there like they were with Bo Nix in the year prior. They saved those for the big games, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. There are a lot of limitations in his game, but what he is at his truest is like a 5'11" pocket passer who sees the field pretty well, who needs to be on the run a lot of the times, mostly because he can't see over offensive linemen. And when your offense, if it's advanced enough to have those type of traits and qualities in it, I think he could do something. He could be a good backup. He could be what, to be another Oregon comparison, he could be what Marcus Mariota has been for most of his career. A guy who's probably a career backup, who has his moments when he steps in and takes a start in week 16 or 17. And you're kind of like, oh, this guy could do something. And then maybe he doesn't. And that's okay. That's an NFL career, as far as I'm concerned. That's Josh McCown's made a whole living off of that. And now he's a coach somewhere. So I think he'll be drafted. It's just going to be somebody who needs a decent backup quarterback, honestly. And there are plenty of those teams, and there's plenty of teams who would rather take a different guy. Lefty doesn't really help. But again, like he said, like we've said, is a productive quarterback. He's won a ton of college football games and done it pretty darn well. And this is how it is with him.
Speaking of NFL careers, do you want to wager how much money Marcus Mariota has in NFL career earnings?
$88 million.
$75 million. So, yeah, I think Dylan will take that.
Yeah, I think, it'd be great. Tell you what. And if he were 6'2", he'd be a first-round quarterback, unfortunately.
Yeah, and those are just the reality. In a draft with quarterback position, we're like, I don't know if I really like any of the quarterbacks very much, Jared. Like, if I'm just being honest. Like, last year's draft, I like a lot of them. I don't really like any of these guys.
I don't like any of them either. Poor New York Giants. You guys are going to get sucked into taking one of these quarterbacks and be bad for the next 8 years. Great. Okay. Final day of the combine. Offensive lineman Josh Connerly Jr. and Johnny Cornelius took part in measurements and things, but Cornelius did not take part in any actual testing. So no 40-yard dash, no vertical, no nothing. I'm just going to run through what his measurements were, which were very interesting, mostly because he's basically like a clone of Josh Connerly Jr. So Johnny was listed at 6'4.5", the same height as Josh Connerly, 310 pounds, 1 pound lighter than Josh Connerly. Let's see, 9 4/8 hand, smaller than Josh, but the same arm length, 33 4/8, and a wingspan of 82 inches, which is 2/8 shorter than Josh Connerly. So these guys are like physical clones, at least in the measurement department at the combine. And honestly, those are pretty good numbers for Johnny. Like he said that he obviously didn't participate in the Senior Bowl. James Crepea reported that he had some sort of an ailment at the Senior Bowl and was still trying to work back to 100% health. So he'll take part in the pro day at Oregon whenever that's officially announced. But I thought those were good numbers for Johnny. I think that could be something that helps him get drafted. And if he runs pretty well at the pro day and if he shows his stuff, like he could be a 5th, 6th, 7th round draft pick at the end of the 2025 draft.
Yeah. Speaking of that kind of, like I posted it was basically like the Spider-Man meme with Josh and a Johnny, except for I would have liked to have seen a Johnny run the 40 so we could kind of nip that in the butt and do some of this testing, because what Josh did athletically is just on a different plane, I think, than what we would have seen from a Johnny. Not trying to be disrespectful, but I think that's really why Josh is going to be a first round, maybe second round draft pick, and a Johnny's an end of the draft guy. Is A, Josh is 2 or 3 years younger, but B, he ran 5.05 in the 40. He jumped 34.5 at 311 pounds, like 8'7" broad. This guy's a freak athlete, and that was the sales pitch for him kind of all along. This is going to be one of the freakier athletic, offensive tackles out there. Johnny might have the same size. He doesn't have that same kind of athleticism. So I will be curious to see what he does when he does, get to Eugene. It's another one of those guys. Obviously, I mentioned kind of Tez and Jabar earlier. Those are guys who did some testing here in Indy. Jabar, not the 40. I think for someone like Ajani, he's got some stuff to kind of prove there. How much juice does he have? Because I think when he came up from Rhode Island, I thought he was a little more twitch. And this last year, I don't know if that really came together. And I do wonder, like, psychologically, what's the response to that Ohio State game for him? I'm not saying he's not going to have an NFL career because he got embarrassed in one football game, but you do wonder if, like, that could kind of make the gears start to turn when you get just kind of embarrassed like that on live TV, just kind of calling it what it is. So he's somebody who, just in general, I'm curious to see what this draft process is for him. I think it's kind of a bummer he hasn't had a chance to go out there and maybe make some noise, just because the last impression, at least that I have of him, is really poor. Not taking anything away from him as a person or anything. And he had some great moments at Oregon, but it was really tough, that Rose Bowl. So we'll see with him. Sorry, I kind of just stole the thunder on Josh, but you can run through some more of your thoughts with him.
Yeah, Josh was awesome. Like you said, 505 40-yard dash, 34.5-inch vertical jump, 171 10-yard split, which led offensive linemen at the combine, 8.7 broad jump, which was like just bang average for offensive linemen. He kind of like what Harmon did on the first day, just kind of solidified what people thought. That's what most of the combine is. It's for guys to make some noise or solidify what they are. And you're not going to get, a dual Carter or somebody like that going in here. But Connerly is certainly working himself up to maybe be a bona fide top 20 pick in the NFL draft. And we'll see eventually. I think he is more of a second-round pick, but this is not a good offensive line class. There's nobody here that you're like, oh, yeah, I would like to take him with the 5th overall pick, unfortunately. This is just how it is this year. And that's okay. That's great for Josh, because he could be getting a 4-year fully guaranteed contract with whoever he plays for. We always want to see that with young guys and getting their money. And he's right there with them. He looked agile on the field in some of those workouts. He's another guy who passes the eye test. He's another guy who passes the film test. He did all of it at the combine. The only thing I think of Josh, his arms pretty darn long, which is great for him as trying to stay as an offensive tackle. I think he might eventually move to a guard at the NFL level. I think you start him out as a tackle, see what he can do. And if he has to go to a guard, he has to go to a guard. He is very similarly size-wise to Rashawn Slater, who is the Los Angeles Chargers left or right guard. I can't remember. But he's a very good offensive guard and a guy who's going to be paid handsomely at one point in his NFL career. And that's just kind of the worry. He just doesn't have, he's like 41st or 42nd percentile in height for the combine for NFL, like, offensive tackles who've gone through the combine. There's this fun Twitter account from Kent Lee Platt who has these RAS scores, which is basically just how good of an athlete are you and how do you compare all time. His composite size grade is poor. He's 2.54 for his height, 6'4.5", and he's 311 pounds, which is kind of light for a tackle. But that's the only thing that I would say, that he moves to guard in his NFL career, but that's a bad thing. Start him out at tackle and see what he does.
Him being listed at 6'5" or measured there is good. I think I'm hesitating just because he was 6'4", 315 on Oregon's roster, and that was to me why I was like, does he have the length to play tackle? I think clearly he actually has, with the arm length and being. I think they list him at 6'5", but maybe he's 6'4.5". But like those little small inches here, and doesn't sound like a lot. Like that, like being listed at 6'5" as opposed to 6'4" doesn't sound like a lot. But in like NFL circles between tackle and guard, maybe it does. I don't know. Yeah. I think he's going to be a tackle. Now, does he stay there? To your point, I have no idea what they'll do with him. I just think he's such an unusual athlete. I worry about him as a pass blocker with that size at tackle. But this feels like somebody at left tackle in the right offense that could be an awesome blindside protector for, a quarterback who wants to throw the ball all the time, down the field. If it's a pass dependent offense that's going to spreads you out, he's great in that. We saw that at Oregon. That was really where he excelled. So kind of I'm with you in that. Yeah, probably most years, if there's a little stronger tackle class, he's not likely a first round pick, but this is somebody I think will probably be a starter pretty much right away, depending on the circumstances he finds himself in. And I'll just be really curious to see how quickly he's effective there. Cause I know that, listening again to some of these draft pods and kind of reading up on Josh, the kind of the perception is a ton of ceiling still left. Definitely kind of the floor isn't, to the ceiling though. There's some room here for some growth because he is only 21 years old. He's still got a lot of, I think, growth potential here, and maybe did put it all together even at Oregon. So how quickly does he get there, and what the ceiling looks like is kind of my question for Josh, because I could see this being somebody who maybe is kind of quiet or underperforms early, but once it kind of all clicks, and maybe that's after a move, positionally, I think he's got a chance to be really special athletically.
Yeah, athletically, he's one of the better guys in this class. He's no Membo out of Missouri, Armand Membo, who's an absolute freak. Have you seen this kid?
I just was slow. I was clicking on it. He's 332 pounds and he ran sub 5.
Yeah. 6'4", 332, 4.91 40-yard dash, 1.74 split, 34-inch vertical jump, 9.7 broad, and then a 31 on the bench press.
Unreal.
Freak. I want to go back to Rashawn Slater, my comparison to Josh. So Josh, obviously 6'4.5". Rashawn Slater, 6'4 1/4. Slater was 7 pounds lighter at 304 compared to 311. Wingspan 80 1/8. Connerly is 82 2/8. So that helps on Connerly's idea of being a tackle. Arm length 33 inches for Slater, 33.5 for Connerly Jr. Slater ran a 4.91 second 40-yard dash, which is much better, but I think that they are pretty darn similar measurement-wise. Obviously, Josh has a bit longer of arms, which will help him maybe stick a tackle longer, but we'll see. I think he'll probably move to guard, but with his athleticism, there might be a chance that he sticks at tackle. And if it clicks with him, like you were saying, at tackle, then he could probably stay there for a good long duration. But it's not that it's a bad thing that he might move to guard. It's just, this is how the NFL is. Like, they're looking for absolute ginormous human beings to be tackles, like Amarius Mims last year, who was like 6'8" and had the world's longest arms, or Joe Alt, the 5th or 6th overall tackle for the Chargers last year. Like, that's just the body type that the NFL wants. It's not exactly what Oregon wants or any other college program. It's just what the NFL only looks for as a first-round tackle.
I'm kind of wondering if he could be a fit with like the Dolphins, with what they want to do, with a lot of like outside zone run plays and just throwing the ball down the field. I don't know. I'm just trying to envision the fit from a tackle perspective. That's all 12, isn't it?
That's it. Yep, that's all.
We did them all. I wanted to get back to the last thing because we're over an hour here, I noticed. So I know some people love that, some people don't. But the last thing I wanted to do is just kind of run through the tiers again and see if we want to make some adjustments here. Because I think Connerly and Harmon are still tier 1. These are like the blue blood prospects, blue chip prospects, I should say. These guys are first round picks, most likely. Maybe like you said, maybe Josh is second. I think he had a nice combine and gave himself a real shot to be a first round pick. Tier 2, this is what I had previously. I wonder if we want to move anybody down or up, I guess. But I had Birch, Jordan James, Tez Johnson, Jeff Bosa, Terrence Ferguson in tier 2. Ferguson, I don't know if he can move to the tier 1 group, but to me, he moves all the way to the top of this tier 2 group with Jordan Birch, who I think also had a really strong day. And I'm not sure if I want to keep Tez or Jeff there yet. They to me could be tier 3. Based
who is in tier 3?
Tier 3 is just everybody else. Cornelius, Jamari probably should be. Jamari should probably move to tier 2. I would say. I think he can get the lift.
I agree.
Jabar Muhammad. I had Dylan Gabriel tier 3 as well. Yeah,
I wouldn't move Tez or Jeff to tier 3. I think they are clear and better NFL prospects than Johnny, Jabar, and Dylan Gabriel. but I would move Jamari up.
I think so too.
I think, yeah, obviously we talked about it, but Tez and Jeff probably had two of the worst performances at the combine other than Jabar. Again, speaking frankly, but I still think that they're better legitimate NFL prospects than the guys in tier 3.
Anybody else? I guess Trayshawn is another person who competed in the combine. Obviously, like Nico didn't compete, so there's no new news there. There's a bunch of other names. I guess one thing I'm wondering on is like if Nico has a really good pro day, could he be somebody looked at drafted above Jabar, which feels strange to say, but physically they're going to be very similar in terms of height and weight, I think.
I agree. It would be very funny if that were the case. But yeah, he's a tier 3 guy for now. I'm interested to see what he does at the combine or the pro day, excuse me. Because I think he was pretty darn good this last year. But the whole being 5'10" or 5'9" is going to hurt him a lot.
Do we have a pro day? Have they announced it yet?
No.
Okay.
Not unless they've sent an email in the last hour and 10 minutes, which they have not. But I can secure my Oregon football season tickets. They're now on sale. So if you're listening and you'd like season tickets, they're probably gone. So tough luck. Better luck next year. Yeah. That's it. That's all I got. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Do you want to do 20 minutes on Severance?
I did catch up last night. Is there only one more episode left? Is that what I'm seeing?
No, I think there are 3 more. I think there's 10.
3 more?
Oh, yeah.
Because we just finished 7, so there's 8.
Yeah, I think there's 10 episodes.
And 10? Oh boy, thank Christ.
Yeah. It's a great show.
Yeah. I was flabbergasted. I saw on Apple TV, I was like, oh my God, it looks like there's only 1 episode left. How the hell are they gonna tie all these loose knots together? Thank the Lord. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. We'll do that conversation off pod mic, so not to bore our Oregon listeners. But if you're watching Severance, if you have a theory, put it in the comments on YouTube. I guess.
Let us know.
What are you thinking? What's going on? Are they clones?
Who knows? And if you haven't seen Severance, you have no idea what we're talking about. But thank you all for listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Once again, for Erik Skopil, I am Jared Mack. Please leave a 5-star review wherever you are listening, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. Leave a comment. Let us know if you think they're clones on Severance. But other than that, we'll have some stuff up this week, I'm sure. We've got women's basketball tournament coming up soon, men's basketball tournament coming up soon. Baseball is always here. There's another trillion games left in the season, but we're all looking forward to everything. So thank you all for listening. Peace.
Talk to you later, folks.